The second section of the debate, the candidate will be asked question by the audience. The candidate will be given 2 minutes to answer and 4 minutes to debate the question. Each person from the audience must state his or her name and whether that person is from the area of the association or outside the area of the association. Those from the association will be given the first priority to ask questions, and those outside the area will be given second priority to ask questions. Now I think we are ready to proceed. Candidate for the mayoral race, Douglas Ford, suggesting to build transit and to break gridlock and build more subway. Whereas Tory is advocating smart transit plan, and Olivia Choi is saying leave it to the planners and more buses and more buses. My question to you is, this is a question to David Chandler.
Sorry, Al, did you want to start with opening remarks?
Yeah, we will, okay, perhaps, that's right. Okay, sorry, I'm going a little ahead here. Okay, let's start with David Chandler with the opening remarks.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great. Ladies and gentlemen, friends and neighbors, and future voters at the back of the room, it's my great pleasure to be back on the campaign trail, standing for re-election for Councillor for Willowdale, Ward 24. I know this community well, having lived in Willowdale for almost 25 years, raising my family here, and having so many friends throughout the ward. Since I was first elected, the interest and concerns of Willowdale residents have been my highest priority. I have brought many improvements to our parks and public spaces. When I was first elected, the Cummer Community Centre just up the road here was only an arena and a small fitness area. Since then, I've added a pool, expanded the fitness facility, a new baseball diamond, a new skateboard park, and a community room. Earlier this year, during one of my ward inspections, I noticed problems and I had contracts issued to replace the air and heating air conditioning system and to refurbish the pool, which is so well used. At McNichol Park, the water spray pad was replaced, and a new artificial turf soccer field is now being installed to serve the thousands of youth and adults in our ward that love to play. There's new playgrounds at Wellsbourne Park, Hindway Park, new lighting and landscaping in Skymark Park. As I promised, a new community centre with another pool, library, and childcare is just beginning construction. There's new pedestrian and cycling trails throughout the ward. We're also building a new 6-acre destination park with a skating rink, a grand central square, an artificial turf field, tree-lined walking and running trails, and much more. Construction will also begin soon. I have stood with my community against overdevelopment, stopping the condominiums at the Shops on Steeles, at Skymark Plaza, and I have reduced or refused many other development proposals in the ward. This summer, we faced the closure of Carefree Lodge, the seniors' home, Finch and Beacon, and I stopped the closure of the seniors' home. I have always supported more subways in Toronto. I was in office when the Shepherd subway was approved and constructed, and I have and will continue to push for expansion of the Shepherd, Yonge Street, and other subways throughout the city. I have accomplished all this while keeping my promise to keep taxes down and canceling the vehicle registration tax. Your community is my community. I think of your problems as my problems. Since I have first been elected, I've been available and here to serve you. I look forward to your continued support on October 22nd. Thank you.
Okay, do you want to go next?
Sure.
Is this right? Okay. It's time for change. Our community needs leadership. Someone who shares our values, someone who will fight for us. Someone who will work for us and focus on solving our challenges for a change. I'm Dan Fox, and I'm running to deliver results as our next City Councillor. I'm running to bring integrity back to Willowdale, and I'm running to win. That's why I'm asking for your support on October 27th. I'm a public servant and community volunteer with deep roots in Willowdale and the right plan to bring positive change to our community. I've lived in Willowdale for over a decade. I studied urban planning at the University of Western Ontario, and I'm passionate about our community and about delivering positive change. I've worked in both the private and public sector. I have extensive experience in frontline leadership and policy development. As your councillor, I will be accessible, hardworking, and responsive, and together we can build a better Willowdale. Serving our community is our highest calling. We deserve a councillor who keeps to the highest ethical standards. Our current councillor has proven that he's wrong for Willowdale. He still won't come clean about his secret sweetheart rental deal. He was nowhere to be found when our homes were crippled by last winter's ice storm, and he still doesn't get why that was wrong. He did for-profit lobbying work and ran for MPP while he was supposed to be working for us. But worst of all, he is responsible for delaying transit expansion projects in this city by half a decade. And, believe it or not, there are actually no laws against anything he did. There's no rules that he's broken, because nobody has ever had the chutzpah to do those things before. Nobody has ever been this brazen. But he knew that morally, these things were absolutely wrong. That's why he used a numbered company to hide behind. And when everything came to light in the media, he could have come clean and disclosed every detail, but he didn't. He could have done the honorable thing and resigned his seat, but he didn't. He could have said, the buck stops here, and that his integrity is something you can take to the bank, but that sure isn't what was taken to the bank now, is it? So it's time for change. It's time to turn the page and begin a new chapter at City Hall with new representation for us. It's time to move forward. That means it's time to stop talking about transit and start building it. Time to stop rubber stamping bad development and start smarter planning that results in smarter growth. It's time to stop the senseless cuts and start investing in strengthening our city's services. And it's time to elect a councillor who shares our values. So, with trust, hope, and hard work on October 27th, I ask for your support to elect me as our next City Councillor. That's how we'll all win, together, for a change.
Thank you. Next we have Michael Dell.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Michael Galea, and I want to be your next City Councillor. I've lived in Willowdale for 33 years. I was born and raised here. I met my wife here, and together we've decided to raise our children here. I have used our schools, our hospitals, our libraries, and as I completed my studies, I even spent my summers working for the City of North York in public works and in the survey department. And finally, I've spent the last 17 years working as an architectural designer and a community planner. I have a long history in our community and a deep understanding of it. I'm here tonight to share with you a vision for Willowdale. We deserve a vibrant, active community where people from different backgrounds can come together to live, work, and play locally. Where we maintain a strong connection to the rest of our city, but reduce our dependency on it. The benefits of living local are countless, offering positive social, medical, economic, and environmental outcomes. By changing one simple aspect of our daily routine, our commute, we can dramatically improve our quality of life. And we can do so by taking 4 steps. By restoring order to the transit debate, so council can get back to work working on our other priorities. Putting a local focus on community planning. Restoring public faith in our ability to deliver capital projects effectively. And by seeing that as we execute our plans, we always ask, how can we do better? Always seeking an improved outcome. Now, over the course of the campaign, there's been a lot of talk about who you shouldn't vote for, and very little discussion about why you should vote for someone. Tonight, I'm asking you to elect me as your representative because you share my vision for our community. because my background in community planning and design, paired with my studies in civil resource management, give you the confidence to know that I can deliver that vision. I am a city builder, and during my 17-year career, I have influenced the shape of countless communities. Many examples are sitting on the table behind you, a couple at least. And in that time, I have learned that starting the development process with the needs of a community yields exceptional results. So I ask that on October 27th, you vote for the candidate that has the most to offer your community, our community. I ask that you vote for Michael Galea.
Thank you. Next we have Randy.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Randy. I would start by declaring that I'm probably the youngest candidate here, and probably also the best looking. I am a lawyer. I talk for a living. I'm glad there's a 3-minute limit, otherwise I'll go on and on and on and on. I specialize in litigation, employment law, municipal law, and all that really good stuff. So I just want to quickly touch on 5 interests of mine that I want to bring to City Hall as your councillor. Number 1 is taxes. I don't like taxes. I don't like taxes so much that I want to freeze property taxes for the next 4 years. I think homeowners need a break. I don't like the land transfer tax. I want to get rid of that. I think that's a bad policy, and I think it's punitive, and it's time for it to go. I care about transportation. I want to talk about subways, and I'm committed to building subways. Toronto needs a world-class subway system, comparable to New York, London, Beijing, Hong Kong, these types of cities. We are a world-class city. We need a world-class subway system. Our subway system is 50 years behind the times. We have 2 lines, one that goes like this, and one that goes like this, and one that's 4 stops and is purple and doesn't lead anywhere. We need to extend that subway line. I care about traffic. I'm concerned that construction in the city seems to take place all the time, and all the major roads seem to be blocked at the same time, and there seems to be no coherent planning as to when construction and when road repairs are to take place. You have the Gardiner block, you have parts of downtown block, you have parts of North York block, all at the same time without any systematic planning going into when construction and repairs should take place. I care about one other thing, and that is term limits. I believe that city councillors should be limited to a term limit of 8 years. That after 8 years, they can't run again. After 8 years, they have to leave, and new people with new ideas and a fresh outlook are introduced to City Hall so we can continually renew our democratic process. And finally, I've said this on TV, I still believe in this, we have a laziness problem with the City of Toronto employees. I don't think they're working hard enough. I think there's garbage that needs to be picked up. I think there needs to be services that are to be more efficient. And the people of this community are not getting the services they need on time. That needs to change. My name is Randy I. On October 27th, please vote for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we can move on. We're ready to proceed to ask questions. Now this question will be directed to David Chandler. And then each of you will be allowed 3 minutes to answer that question. At the conclusion of all the answers, you will have 4 minutes for question. You can debate the question for 4 minutes. So we're ready to ask now David China. Candidate for the mayoral race, Douglas Ford. Sorry. Mayor for the candidate, Douglas Ford is suggesting to build transit and to break gridlock, and he's suggesting to build more subway and subway. Whereas Tory is advocating smart transit plan, and Olivia Chaw is saying leave it to the planners and more buses and more buses. My question to you is, which plan do you support to build transit and break gridlock in Toronto and Willowdale? So you have 3 minutes.
Well, I have always been an advocate of subways. Started as my experience as a young man protesting for the extension of the Allen Expressway, or the Spadina Expressway at the time, and the subway line, which was not in place. We were able to win approval for the family to see the subway line built up to Yorkdale. Recently, in the 90s, it was extended up to Downsview, and now it's going up all the way to Highway 407 and up to York Regional. I've always believed in that. When it came to the Shepherd subway, I was on council and I supported not only building the subway, but I was able to win approval to put the station in at this area, which may be quiet now, but it's going to be the home of our new community center. Subways, to me, are the way to go. I believe that we should have been, and I've advocated in council, to produce an annual budget that would construct at least 1 kilometer of subways a year. Then we would have 1 kilometer in 1 year, 4 kilometers in 4 years, 8 kilometers in 8 years, and hopefully we would then get our colleagues at the federal and provincial level to come on board. But to me, subways is the answer to the problem in the city. Extending the Shepherd subway from Yonge over to Downsview is a no-brainer to give you a second connection, so a second prospect. We've already got the environmental assessments approved to push the Yonge subway to Steeles and up to 407. We talk about the downtown relief line. I've asked them to look at extending it not just to Eglinton Avenue, but to move it over to the Don Valley Parkway and up Highway 404, right up to 407 to get traffic out of this community. Because the people up in 905 have no other way to go. So subways are the way to build transit through the city. The Smart Track plan will help bring commuters in from outside of Toronto into Toronto and may stop some of the gridlock if you can get approval along the lines because they're owned by CP. And if you can get the funding in place to do that.
Thank you, David. Michael?
Thank you very much. I'm going to have to say, first of all, that the question simply isn't as simple as subways versus light rail versus the Smart Track. But to start things off initially, I'm going to say that of the plans that we've seen, I do like John Tory's the most. I think it's the only plan that thinks a little differently, thinks in a modern perspective, thinks of a plan that keeps people out of holes from being underground. It's something that might actually be a pleasure to ride as opposed to, well, like a rat in a hole, basically, in a subway. And in the end, we've seen incredible outcomes in Vancouver, for example, where they do have above-ground mass transportation, where people are actually connected to the environment around them rather than just sort of teleporting through a tube. And the ridership was significant, anyways, compared to subway expansions. So right off, I'd like to say that John Tory is at least the only one who's thinking in modern terms, because subways and, well, streetcars at least, not the LRT that's being proposed, are proposals that are 50 years old, really. They're outdated technology for the most part. Now, in the long run, I think that we need to streamline the decision-making process. I agree that we need to start listening to the process, or to professionals, because up to now, we've had councillors and mayoral candidates sort of plucking ideas out of the air. And I think realistically what council and the mayor does best is they engage the public and they determine what our needs are. And we need to look at those needs, and that's what our role should be limited to, is we should be out there asking, what is it that we need from a transit system, not what transit system do you want, because that's a question none of us are qualified to answer. And so in the end, we need to think about things like, does it provide shelter for us? How quickly does it move? What's the goal of the system? Is it to move people a long distance, or is it to have people interact with the local community, like a shopping community, hopping on the tram, for example, like you would in Paris or London? And in the long run, basically, we should have professionals bring proposals to us based on those needs, a variety of proposals, and then vote based on those, rather than councillors wasting our time, councillors and mayoral candidates wasting our time, flipping back and forth between plans, costing us millions of dollars in environmental assessments and studies when they're really not qualified to be making those decisions. And the end game is that's why it's cost us that money. So that's where I stand on transit, basically.
Randy, you may proceed.
Excellent. Just taking one step back, as a city councillor and as a city councillor candidate, it is my position that I will work with any mayor who is elected and help them realize their vision. So I'm not here to endorse any particular candidate or any particular mayor, subway, or LRT plan. That being said, my vision of a comprehensive Toronto subway system would have the Shepherd line extend to York University and beyond, Ideally, all the way to the airport, so we can have a subway line to Pearson, and we can bring people in quickly, as opposed to using our current mode of transportation, which are these very annoying taxis. I would like to see a line along Lakeshore, or at least somewhere downtown, so these new condo developments and these new people living downtown have a place to go onto the subway, and this will connect to Union Station, and up and up and up, and they go to Finch or Downsview or wherever they need to go. Again, if I were to choose a subway and or transportation plan that makes sense to me, I would agree with my colleague that John Tory's plan makes sense to me on a personal level, and I would support that on a personal basis, given what I've stated about my disclaimer of not choosing a favorite at this stage.
Dan?
I think that during an election campaign, we see from all the candidates, particularly candidates for mayor, very nice looking maps of what they propose, and we've seen it before, but without really good proposal for how we would pay for it. So in order to address the transit plans, we also need to address how we would pay for it. And it seems like the folks who are advocating most for the most expensive options for transit also seem to be advocating for keeping taxes low. And I don't see how those things can happen at the same time. So in terms of endorsing a transit plan, there are elements of each plan that make sense, and the new mayor will have to work together with the new council to find the best elements from each plan. So a downtown relief subway line, light rail where it makes sense based on the population density, electrifying the GO lines as John Tory has proposed, and in areas where the density doesn't support additional subways or light rail, enhancing bus service as well. So there are elements of each plan that do make sense, but during an election campaign, of course, we're talking about transit plans as maps that we see that the candidates draw, and I don't think that any plan that's proposed during an election campaign is truly realistic. I think we need to work together to build transit as quickly as possible. We need to build transit now. We need to build the plans that have been proposed and approved. And the solution to transit in the city will include subways, buses, and light rail in all parts of the city. We're building light rail on Eglinton, including underground on Eglinton where it makes sense to build it underground, and in other parts of the city, depending on the population density and projected growth, different modes of transit make sense. And we need to also trust the experts on these transit plans, and not simply the maps that we draw during election campaigns, which never seem to happen.
Thank you, Dan. The question is now open for debate, and you have 4 minutes.
How would you pay for your subways? Randy or David?
Well, I think the first thing that we need to do, and I've stated this in the past, is our provincial and federal partnerships need to be strengthened, and the money, or the large part of the money, should be coming from our provincial and federal partners. This has been the case in the past where certain plans have fallen through, and I think that's inappropriate. As Canada's most vibrant city, as Canada's economic center, there needs to be funding coming from other levels of government to help support, build a world-class subway system so we can be on par with other cities.
I think we already know that funding has been secured for the most part. I think all levels of government have pretty much came forward. I think what Dan's asking is, how do you plan to pay for the rest? Because it is billions of dollars we're talking about.
And then not just the building of the subway, but also the operating costs. The TTC operating budget now is not sufficient to maintain what we have. Where would the money come from to continue to operate all of these new transit lines?
There's 2 parts to the subway debate. Of all the transit in the city, subways make money. They pay for
Some
themselves.
subways make money. I don't think that the Shepherd line makes money.
I didn't interrupt you, so can I answer the question, please? They make money. That's why the province was looking at taking over the subway systems in Toronto, not the bus and the streetcar lines. Secondly, to pay for them. The city is currently running a surplus of over $100 million a year. When you look at that, and you look at the savings that I believe we can achieve, and I know how to find savings. I chaired the budget committee for many years. I worked on that issues, and I know that there's savings to be had within the city. We all know that on a $9 billion budget, you can find more savings than we found, and we continue to work on that. But you can find those savings. And thirdly, when the Shepherd Line was constructed, it cost $1 billion. I did a study as to the value of returns to each level of government based on the sales taxes, and 1/3 of the cost of a condominium ends up being in taxes, income tax, GST, all the other taxes and fees. And that $1 billion was paid back to all 3 levels of government, just from the development that it was approved. Subways make sense. Now, I was also there when the LRT, or the streetcar line, was approved on St. Clair, and it's been a disaster. And I was there at council to stop Don Mills from being ruined by putting an LRT in the middle of the roadway, which would have reduced us to 2 lanes of traffic. And do you know what happens when they put an LRT in? They double space the stops because they don't have them as close, and the community loses that ability to get there. That's the problem on Eglinton, for example, between Bayview and Leslie. There's Bayview, Laird, and Leslie, and they have to run a bus in between to pick people up. It doesn't make sense, and at least that one's underground. That's why I've always advocated for subways. I know you can find the savings, and I believe that the real funding has to come from the city to start it off, to show the money's on the table, to fund 1 kilometer of subway every year. It's about $250 million. And then to look for our provincial and federal partners who've been able to escape that, because there hasn't been any funding from the city on the table to begin with. What we've been paying off over the last 4 years is a $1 billion price tag for the new streetcars that have been purchased for the city, that were approved under David Miller. And until we could go on with anything else, we had to come up with a shortfall that was left over from his term on council. Now that that's paid for, we can start to put that money towards real transit improvements, which is the extension of the Yonge Line, helps us with traffic here, the extension of the Shepherd Line, which also helps us here. I'm looking to provide good transit for the residents of Willowdale. That's what I'm looking for.
Okay, I tend to see or hear a little bit of buck passing there, because ultimately the composition of council is nearly the same as it was in David Miller's day, and David Miller only had 1 vote. So to pass the buck off to a past government doesn't quite fly here. Now, secondly, I think there's been a bit of a mischaracterization. I would agree with Mr. Shiner that perhaps the investment wasn't there, returned, because the type of light rail that was proposed on St. Clair, that was built on St. Clair, isn't quite the same as the LRT that's going on to Eglinton. Mr. Fox has pointed this out before. They carry a whole lot more people, and there's a lot more capacity there, and that's really where the development comes from, is increasing capacity. Once you can move people, then you don't necessarily have to dedicate land to parking, and you start to see higher densities available from the city, and that's really what it's all about, is how many people can they put on into that space.
Sorry, Dan, do you have anything to say?
I wanted to point out, actually, as Mike said, I pointed this out before, St. Clair is not an LRT. St. Clair is a streetcar the same as you have downtown. So if we're talking about light rail, that's not what we have on St. Clair. So the continuous mischaracterization of St. Clair as light rail, or trying to suggest that it is a way to distract from the reality of that situation. And then when it comes to light rail, Mr. Shiner pointed out that he doesn't like light rail because of the spacing between the stops is too far, but he prefers subways where the spacing between the stops is even further. So you need to take a bus between the stops. So if we're going to build subways everywhere with stops spaced the way subways are spaced, you'll need to take a bus. You'll have fewer people who can walk to a transit station, and will instead need to take a bus to get to their nearest transit station. So there are some places actually where light rail does make more sense than subways.
Just have a few seconds. You want to?
Yeah, I would say that we need to look at the big picture. How much is going to cost has been the excuse used by council for many, many years in not having the political will to get it done. And that's been my rant all along this campaign. You can always use it's too much cost to stall anything. But if you don't have the will, and if you're not going to earmark the money and put the money aside to build the subway, then in 50 years we're going to have the same subway system that we have now, and I think that's unacceptable.
If we might just add one more point, very quickly, to the distance between the stops. I might add that anyone who's taken the subway from Don Mills Station down Shepherd, you probably know that you're traveling a good 100, maybe 125 meters underground, and then traveling a significant different distance beyond that, including the walk from the bus, or if you happen to be driving to Fairview Mall, you're then driving up 4 to 5 stories to park your car in the top floor. So you can probably walk to Leslie a whole lot faster than you could take the subway. So in terms of short trips within a community, it is completely and utterly unacceptable.
Well, just on a
Thank you.
final point,
We can move on.
the distance on the subway, on the LRT lines under Eglinton are the same as if it was a subway. And the problem with the Eglinton LRT line, if anyone who's tried to get on the subway going down at Finch, or more importantly down at Lawrence or anywhere like that, try Eglinton where you wait 3 trains now in the morning, at least, to get on a subway. Do you know what's going to happen to your ride on the Yonge Street line when that LRT opens up? Do you think anybody will be able to get onto the subway that's there, the one system going downtown now? You need to expand the subway system across the city with the alternate routes that have been proposed to actually get people moving. And that's what our community needs.
Thank you, David. We can now move on to question number 2, and it's directed to Mr. Dan Fox. It is often said OMB is there to serve the developers. Although I understand there has been some amendments whereby some of the powers OMB are now with the planning committee and the council. What are your views concerning OMB? Whether OMB should be completely abolished, and if not, why? You have 3 minutes to this question.
Well, the OMB, the Ontario Municipal Board, is a provincial body, so it wouldn't be up to City Council to abolish the OMB. That being said, I do support the plan to bring the powers of the OMB into the city. It's called a local appeals body. We're already exploring that, and it's something that I support. So that would turn the OMB appeals process into a local appeals body within the city.
Randy?
Just to add to that, the Ontario Municipal Board is a statutory body which is mandated by the laws of the province. So getting rid of it would be the same as getting rid of the Landlord and Tenant Board, or the Workplace Safety Board, or the Ontario Labour Relations Board. It doesn't make any sense to get rid of and eliminate entirely a statutory body that has a function in the similar way that a court has a function. I think the problem is that there is this perception that the members of the Ontario Municipal Board are pro-developer and that they're allowing development to occur in places that may encroach on residential areas, that may encroach on environmentally sensitive areas, so on and so forth. And that's something that we need to address at the local and on the legal level in ensuring that decisions are fair and that unfair decisions are appealed accordingly. As well, there are many appeal routes through the OMB that go upwards through the judicial reviews to the court system, and citizens can also lobby local governments to have these decisions appealed.
Now, first, I want to make sure that we're clear on what they're saying about the local appeal body, because there has been a minor bit of mischaracterization there. There's been the talk that it's going to remove the jurisdiction of the OMB. First of all, that's false. It does give the city the opportunity. I've read the City of Toronto Act and the Planning Act, I know, as well as a number of others. I work with them daily. And ultimately, the City of Toronto Act gives us the power to see take jurisdiction in only certain matters. Those would be minor variances and consent applications. Now, that's really the small stuff when you think about it. That's when somebody wants to build a house. Sometimes in large developments, there are variances associated with them. But for the most part, it's associated with what's called a rezoning application or an official plan amendment. The City of Toronto Act does not give us jurisdiction over those applications. So first of all, let's make sure that we're clear there, that the OMB still does have that jurisdiction. Now secondly, The OMB, has been characterized very poorly in the past, and there have been some bad decisions that they made. But in the end, there is more than Toronto's official plan and our zoning bylaw at stake that they consider. Toronto considers, for the most part, our bylaw and our official plan, but it is their responsibility to consider documents like the Places to Grow Act, the Provincial Policy Statement, the Planning Act, and the City of Toronto Act, and a number of others. And their jurisdiction goes well beyond that as well. But anyhow, in the long run, we have to make sure that our official plan considers those documents as well. And we have to make sure that our approach considers those documents as well. Our approach to opposing development or reshaping development that isn't necessarily appropriate. Maybe we're taking the wrong approach to dealing with these people. And I'd like to just say that I've been on both sides of the table, whether I've even been representing people who were opposing developments or on the side of those who've been in favor. And again, there's an example of an article written by Christopher Hume about a project that I work with that I would love to explain to any of you later in the back. But our approach has been flawed by just taking staunch opposition. There are strategies that we can take, and by being on both sides of the table, I can provide those strategies. And I'd like to.
I have been very clear in supporting my community and wanting to abolish entirely the Ontario Municipal Board. It is unfriendly and does not listen to residents. If any of you have gone to a hearing, the most that you'll be allowed to do is make a statement while the professionals sit there and give advice as to how it meets this building or that building or something nearby. I have gone there and been so depressed because I've sent many applications there for years. And let me tell you, on some we've been very successful, but we're fighting it. We're at council, you come in and you speak to the city council. You come to community council, we have public meetings, and then if you don't like what's being approved, you go to community council, you can state your view, and myself and my colleagues listen, make recommendations to council, and council deals with it. And you have someone to come back to. You can say, Councillor, I don't like how you voted, or Councillor, you did a good job. But what happens is after the appeal period is in place, which I think is 160 days, if the council hasn't made a decision, a developer can appeal it to the Ontario Municipal Board, and then you have one appointed person from the province who adjudicates based on the planning merits as it's presented to them by professionals. And I have to send planners and lawyers, and residents can come down and say something, but you don't really count. And that's not fair to have a provincial government that doesn't count you as being important as neighbors, because I do, and I care, and I've been doing this for a long time. Now, what we've approved at council is to take over the appeals process on items that are in front of the Committee of Adjustment. It's been said they're minor applications. But when you have a 30-story building with 200 units, the developer comes in and says, I want to add 3 stories and another 30 or 40 units. They consider that minor. When we may have fought it down from 36 to 30, they can come back and push it back up on appeal, and if we don't like it, the Committee of Adjustment will deal with it, and all we can do is appeal to the Ontario Municipal Board now and have it adjudicated there. It's wrong. There's a development on Shepherd Avenue next to Bayview Village Mall called St. Gabriel's Place. The official plan says there should have been no development on the north side of Shepherd until there was substantial development on the south side. Period, finished, black and white. I put it in the plan, it was approved by council. What happens? Someone buys the site, brings in an application, the board hears it anyways. The board decides there's planning merits on it and approves it. Over 200 units. It's a development-friendly body that has to be abolished so you as residents have someone to come back to and say, I don't like what you're doing. I don't like your policies. Another thing we're trying to do to get around the board is to put in place on Yonge Street. It's called the North Yonge Street Official Plan, which we're reviewing now, north of Cummer Avenue, between Cummer and Steeles. What's called a development permit system. Now, we're not sure we're going to do it yet because it's not been done yet in the City of Toronto. But what has been said to me, is once you decide on the height, the density, the locations of the buildings, that's it. It's a plan that sticks, which is what everybody said. They said, how come there's an official plan and there's zoning in place and every developer can get around that? Well, we have to stop that. I have been strongly opposing the OMB for years. I don't like having hearings adjudicated by one individual that's appointed, but I believe if you look at their decisions, they're very pro-development. They look at the Places to Grow Act, which the province said you got 1 million people to Toronto and say, that'll take another 10,000 people in this area or 5 and that. Prove it. I don't believe that's right.
Thank you.
If you've been opposing the OMB for years and they're still walking all over the community, then clearly we need to try a different approach. Clearly what we're doing right now is not working.
And your suggestion would be?
That we need to first bring all of the authority of the OMB to a local appeals body.
But how would you do that? It's provincially regulated. You can
That's
talk
what I
about
said.
it. We've been fighting it. I've been after our local member, who you're friendly with, to do something. He was in the Minister of the Attorney General's office. Do something. Give us some rights here.
Well, maybe.
What would you do? What would you do, Dan, to actually make it happen? You know, we have made it happen. We have brought at least the appeals for the Committee of Adjustment to the city. We're looking at the development permit system. We're moving that way. Now we have to move over to the province to allow us to deal with any appeals that are in place for development process in the city. And let me tell you, the City of Toronto can deal with that. We've got great planning staff. They know the city. There's a great official plan. It can work. It's when people want to go over that. So Dan, how would you actually do that? Besides
Maybe
advocating?
working against and going after other levels of government and running against them and working against them is not the way to get it done. Maybe you need to work together with other levels of government.
The city has. The city council. It's not me as a person. This is Toronto City Council. Look at how many motions we have passed continually to abolish the OMB. Toronto City Council has been there. Our staff have been there. We're there. We keep saying it. We have done it. We're fighting for you as residents of the community to bring planning back to the local level. That's what we want. And if you're going to criticize it, tell me how you'd actually bring a change instead of just saying, speak to them and be friendly with them. Well, talking to them hasn't worked.
The way to bring change is to work together with other levels of government, not against
But they're
them,
development,
and to bring
they're
in
pro-development.
If I may, we are regulated. It comes back down to this sort of transit catch-22. If I may get back to transit, just for a second, because it is relevant to this discussion. Ultimately, we've been talking a lot about the Places to Grow Act and the Guide to Growth and the Greater Golden Horseshoe and the Planning Act. And all that stuff says, basically, is that we have to get the best investment, or we have to utilize the investment made. So as long as we are investing large dollars in transit, we will have this appeal board. And we are getting some of those funds from the province. We will have this appeal board in place that looks at this document to make sure that they are getting the returns that David has already talked about, to make sure that we are getting the best return on those infrastructure dollars. And so ultimately, in the end, there is an approach here. We have to look at the community. We have to ask the community, regardless of what we put in place. I think we have to realize that no one is going to give us 100% jurisdiction over ourselves, right? We can't have it's like asking us to abolish the Supreme Court to some extent. There has to be an appeal body. The OMB also hears appeals from residents, right? So if the city were to approve something that you didn't like, you can appeal that to the OMB, right? And not all applications are friendly to the community. So in the end, it does work both ways. I do agree with David. And the DPS system, the development permit system, does work, but it only works for 5 years. He's quite right on that, but there is a cap on that for 5 years. I had that confirmed by staff a couple of weeks ago. So it's an interesting idea. It's a great idea that goes from a top-down process to more a bottom-up, and I don't mean to call the community the bottom, but that's the way they refer to it. But in the end, there's a process there, and we really need to think about what we're building, and we need to communicate with the community what these things are going to be, because most of us, planning knows that when they're dropping a subway in the ground, this is what's going to happen. They're engaging the public, trying to get the public's needs, to mix the public's needs along with the province's needs in these documents, but they can't always get the mix right because we're going too aggressively with transit in certain areas. So we have to think about that. We really have to think. If we want to dig subways, we have to ask the communities that those subways are going to pass through, are you ready for this? Because it's going to happen. And that's how we deal with the situation. We realize that something is a reality, and we adapt our approach to meet that reality.
I would disagree with Mr. Shiner on abolishing the Ontario Municipal Board. These are statutory bodies put in place by law, and there's a reason they're there. I understand the councillor's frustration with the board, and there are channels by which you can appeal these decisions. and I understand there may be a perception that the board is pro-developer or they're more inclined to rule in favor of certain groups of people, but this is based on evidence and based on the course of the board hearing. So to be brazen about it and say, let's abolish the municipal board is like asking people to say, let's sign up and abolish the landlord and tenant board, let's abolish the labor relations board, let's abolish the EI board, because we don't agree with their decisions. That's not the way to handle these situations. It's through internally changing the mechanism by which decisions are made, but not getting rid of the entire mechanism altogether. That would be irresponsible.
So let me just tell you, my frustrations with the Ontario Municipal Board are your frustrations. My frustrations are the community frustrations. My frustrations are the phone calls that I get every time a development's out there, and it's getting bigger and bigger. And we did approve a plan along Shepherd Avenue. It's called Official Plan Amendment 392 with community consultation, and at the time a meeting with Mayor Lastman and my residents to say you get more density if you get a subway. They approved it with conditions, and that's why we ended up with the Desarian subway station, but a lot of benefits are coming. But the other thing that happens is it's not as simple as what they say. I'll tell you, when you go down, and everybody complains about traffic from a development. So you have a planner that goes down, a transportation planner, and I know lawyers and people that are planning like it, but they say, oh, we've done a study and it works. Now I've had my ratepayers group, the president from ratepayers, condos, tennis group, all meeting last year on numerous occasions with city staff, and eventually I won the support of the city planner, the head of transportation, the deputy city manager, to go forward with the study that will look at changing the way they measure development. Because what happens is, they say, oh, 30 stories, 300 cars, well, only at rush hour 100 will come out, 50 in each direction, and guess what? We've measured that there's a gap in the traffic that they can fit into. But that means everybody behind has to wait longer. I'll give you the numbers. At Bayview and Shepherd, or Leslie and Shepherd, some of the worst intersections in the city. And what happens? They say they're okay. They're at the same level that they have been for 10 years. Absolutely. Only so many cars can go through the light in so many seconds it's open. But the long lineup of traffic now at Bayview goes back to Canadian Tire. People can't get through because the transportation planners and statistics that the OMB accepts aren't ones that you would ever believe. So now we're looking at, I'm going to have new recommendations in the year as to how to look at those differently, because it's not fair to you. Your roadways have tremendous capacity on them as far as transportation planners and the OMB is concerned. There's lots of gaps, because every time a light stops and there's a hole, a few cars can go out. So if it's 25 cars in an hour and 5 can go out every 2 minutes, then they all fit. But you can't get down the roadway. You experience it every single day, and you call me about it. And I think we have to bring that planning back into the city and not leave it with an appointed individual at the provincial level that doesn't care about us.
Thank you, David. Our next question is directed to Michael Galea. The residents of Willowdale would like to keep the single-family development in their neighborhood, and we find each and every day new development coming up in this area. What is your view on the construction and development in Willowdale?
Thank you very much for the question, and it's very pertinent. The new development that we're seeing in the city right now, I think, is somewhat inappropriate. We've heard a bit of talk tonight about it. It's called a mixed-use model. Basically what that means is we're supposed to try and mix a variety of uses into one building to create a more efficient, or give a more efficient use of the site and give us more opportunities within the neighborhood for a complete community that works together. Now, what we've seen mainly along Shepherd is a lot of ground floor retail with condominiums on top. And to me, I don't see that as acceptable, because that doesn't quite create the opportunities that were meant to be created by the mixed-use model. We don't see, retail is an important part of the streetscape. It makes an interesting place for people to walk and shop, but does it offer the type of diversity and employment market that we need to create a complete community where we can live, work, and play here. And so my thought is that, if we are going to be seeing increases in density, I would like to see real targets set on the amount of that, on the density, the percentage of the density that is dedicated to high-quality employment spaces, like say offices, for example, or live-work units, or things like that, that offer people a better opportunity for jobs. So that, and then we need to get out and we need to sell those spaces, as well as cultural experiences and that sort of thing. Now, we do have a responsibility we have to take on some of the brunt of the development that is happening in the city. There is a population growth, right? And so we do need some development, but I would also like to see that those condos become more flexible. So that we propose a flexible model for condominiums where there's a legal framework in place that would allow people to, maybe, say, merge 2 units if they needed to. If they needed a family to grow, needed space to grow, and then maybe split those units back down into 1 unit, into 2 individual units in the long run, so that could be more of a savings mechanism. So that people who move into condos are long-term members of the community, because that's another issue that we see with condos, is that they're very small, and so they wind up being a stepping stone. And so what you get is people moving into the community for very short periods of time until they can afford a home. And that may not be in our neighborhood. And so we wind up with a very large transient population that doesn't necessarily engage in the community. And that's not necessarily a good thing. There will always be, people who are here temporarily, and that's fine. But we need to encourage long-term membership in the neighborhood, both from businesses and from residents.
Question is now open for debate. Wendy?
I would say that my main concern with development is the lack of public space in the city of Toronto. We are increasingly living an isolated existence where we stay at home, we don't know our neighbors, there is no place to interact. If you go to cities in Europe where traditionally they've had city squares, places, fountains, parks, where you can go see your neighbors, see people who live in the community, I think that's a model that we should strive for, where we create more public space in Toronto so that we can go out at night, in the evening, during the day, and actually meet people face to face instead of staying at home with our computers.
I think we're all going to be, or mostly in agreement, that where you have new developments, where you have more residential space, you also need more employment spaces, and that I agree, we should set targets for employment spaces. There will always be population growth in Toronto. People come to Toronto, it's a destination where people move to. So our population will continue to grow, and we do need places to house them. But when we build developments, we need balance. We need the balance between residential, office and retail, commercial spaces, places to work, places to shop, and then we also need complete streets with green space and community centers and parks and all of the facilities that people expect in a complete community. We're not getting that now. Part of the reason goes back to the earlier discussion about the OMB, but it also has to do with developers right now who work very closely with City Council and then with the OMB to get what they want, which is as much residential development because that's the most profitable for them, and we don't get enough of all of the other kinds of development that make for a complete community.
Well, we actually are. First of all, we stopped some of the residential developments. One very creatively, the shops on Steeles was approved by the OMB, but Toronto City Council won't let them put in sewer capacity because of a motion I had, so they can build condos but they can't flush the toilets. So they're not going forward. Skymark Plaza, they tried an application there, it was horrible, they backed right off. I don't think it's going to go anywhere. But when you talk about good development, you can take a look at Shepherd Avenue. Across from Bayview Village Mall, if you notice, there's a little parkette next to the Bayview subway station. Well, that's being extended to a complete row of parks in front of every building that's going eastward from there. You'll see it at the corner now of Green Drive, because I've had the city endorse building a linear park across the entire stretch. It's going to be great. A place to walk, a place to stop, it's complete. You want office buildings? We have. When the Concord site was owned by Canadian Tire, we approved over a 20-story office building by the McDonald's site. Well, Canadian Tire sold everything but the office site because Concord didn't want it, and they can't find a tenant to share it with them. They were going to move their head office there with them. I worked with them on that. They were going to move their head office as long as they could find someone else to take part of the building. They wouldn't move into it. But yet on that site, we've got 20% as residential. We are getting a new community center. We're getting a 6-acre destination park, not a park for them, a park for us, with a central square, a skating rink, a piazza, with parking all around it, a miracle. Got on-street parking so you can drive there, because you can't get there by transit, and enjoy it. It's a place for people. In all these new developments now, I understand they shouldn't be short-term units. Well, they're not. The plans are all requiring the developers to put quite a number of large family units inside all of them. And on the Concord site in particular, every single block, they're limited to the number of units. They can't add to that. We've tied them down really tight. And they have to put family units in. We're trying to build that. But there is a market force out there. And the market force says condominiums of a certain price is what will sell. So we do have family units. We have larger units like at St. Gabriel's in the end, or New York Towers, or the Concord site that's coming on. But you can't force the developer to build a certain size of unit to his, because it's market driven for young families that want to move into them, and they'll pay less to get one, or for people that are downsizing, and they can't afford to spend the same price on their home they got for their home on a condo and pay all those fees. So we are working our way through the process.
Thank you, David. Next question is directed to Randy I. Land transfer tax is burden on the young family, starting out to pay double taxation, municipal as well as provincial. What is your position on the land transfer tax, and how would you help the young families who want to buy property in Willowdale?
Well, as I stated in my opening speech, my position is quite simple. It should be eliminated. Gone. I think this is an unfair tax. It's a punitive tax that is targeting young families and targeting seniors in times where the money is most important. Young families who need to establish themselves, or seniors who may need to downsize, need that extra cash. And the land transfer tax punishes these groups of people. It's punitive, and it just adds more money in the City of Toronto coffers that doesn't flow back to the citizens of Toronto. So, simple answer, get rid of it.
Thank you. Question is now open for debate.
I've been asked this question a few times, and I've been asked, would I abolish the land transfer tax? And to me, it's only half a question, because reducing revenue by that amount, by abolishing the land transfer tax, would result in either reducing services by $300 million or increasing your property taxes by 15%. So if you want to ask a question about the land transfer tax, would we abolish the land transfer tax and increase property taxes instead by 15%? Or do you want to ask, should we abolish the land transfer tax and cut services then by $300 million? And if so, which services can we do without? So if we're going to ask a complete question, then we can talk about it. But since you referenced young families specifically with regard to the land transfer tax, on that issue, first-time home buyers are exempt from paying the land transfer tax. So for young families, if it's their first home purchase, they're exempt. So that would be
They only exempt up to $2,000.
up to a certain home value.
But not
Yes.
completely.
Right.
Well, first of all, I would abolish the city's portion, the land transfer tax, because I feel it's punitive and unfair, except for a little bit, just enough to pay for the heating in this room. Because it's cold, it is cold. I see everybody shivering. But seriously, I never voted for it. I felt it was a punitive tax. I feel you should be honest. If you're spending money, the revenue that you should have at City Council is property taxes. You should spend it wisely. I opposed all the tax increases under David Miller because we took a budget that was $5 billion when the new city started in '98, went to $6 billion under 2 terms of Mel last year. We tried to balance things off. Under David Miller, it went from $6 billion to $9 billion annually in our budget in 2 terms. In 1 term under this new council, with all the turmoil that you have to remember still the majority of council is still conscious about spending dollars. You can see all the fights in the press and everything else that you have, but we have kept our budget within a couple of $100 million of where we started because we're continuing to find savings. The land transfer tax has to go. If you're a young family and you want to buy a house, why do you start to pay 4% of the house price for nothing? Just to a registration system. And if you're a senior and you're moving down and you sell your house, after you pay the commission to your agent, you've got to pay another 4% just to get into your condo, or your smaller house, or your townhouse. It's completely unfair. It's a dishonest tax. It's not straightforward. It should have never come in, and we should have never used it at council, and I fought against it for years. I've always been an advocate against it. You have to get rid of it, and you can. He said the same thing about the vehicle registration tax. You can't get rid of that, and we got rid of it. And we still kept taxes down. You may not be able to get rid of the land transfer tax in 1 year, but you have to start as city council to get rid of it, because guess what? Real estate sales go up and they come down. And when the market finally drops, the revenue's not going to be there, and the sales
Minutes to debate the question. Now we are open question from the audience.
My name is Michael Herendorf, and I do live in the Hillcrest area. Mr. Shiner, Mr. Fox, in both his literature and this evening, has leveled some fairly strong charges about you and your family. I think it would be good if you could clear the air about that. I would like to hear you address it, because it hasn't been addressed.
Well, I did address it with him after the debate on Rogers. They are misrepresentations and they are untruths. They are not truthful things, and if you read the articles, you find that I told the media that's not true. But the media told me right after I was elected, you can say what you want, we'll write what we want. And Mr. Fox said to me, well, that may be, but I'll do anything I can to get elected. Now I said, why don't you tell people in Willowdale what you do for them, because I've never been, and I don't think people in Willowdale want to see an American-style mudslinging campaign. I am honest, I have great integrity, and I value that I've done the work. And those are just stories that were written that are not true. It says I kept my salary while I ran for provincial office. It was a 4-week period when I ran with Mr. Tory in 2007. That's over 7 years, 7.5 years ago. And I did send a letter, canceled my salary, and anything that I had received, I donated to a youth shelter. But the story says I continued to get it. And the stories go on like that. They aren't true. But I'm not going to spend my time talking about mistruths. I'm going to spend my time telling you what I've done for you and what I will do for you. I'm not going to get into American-style mudslinging campaign. I won't do anything to get elected. I believe that you deserve to know from us as candidates what we'll do for you, as the other candidates have told you, and not get into this, he did this and he did that. That's not talking about the character of the individual that's running. It's a mischaracter of the person that's there, and I've had many people call me very upset about hearing those things.
I'd like to address that then. Thank you. So all of the things which I've pointed out to people were widely reported, not just in one media outlet, but in multiple media outlets, and I'm happy to share those media reports. It's nothing that it's not mudslinging if it's true, and it is true. It's been described by the media, and if it wasn't true, then there was certainly an opportunity at the time to point that out. In many of these reports, it says clearly that they tried to reach him for comment and weren't able to reach him for comment, which also is, I understand from knocking on doors and talking to people, the experience of many constituents trying to reach the councillor's office and not being able to reach him. So it's clearly identified in each of these media reports that exactly what I described is accurate, and it's not mudslinging to tell people what happened. This is an election campaign. These are facts widely reported in the media, including that you didn't just run for office while you were collecting your salary, but also worked as a lobbyist and a registered lobbyist in the federal lobbyist register. So clearly, working as a lobbyist on the side while he was working as a city councillor, when he should have been working for us.
So let me answer. So when I ran for provincial office, I did both the work of my councillor's job without receiving any pay. To say that you don't get a response from my office is insulting the individuals in the back of the room that have worked with me for over a decade and are there early in the morning to late at night and come to public meetings all the time, and the public people that are there. And those of you that call my office know that we give the greatest response. We don't have voicemail. We're there for you. We answer your emails. Anyone that's going to contact me knows that I work directly with the departments. You bring up another one. I worked as a federal lobbyist. You know, I sat and I worked on district heating and cooling here in the city. It was a great thing. I was asked, could you find someone at the federal level that could talk to us so we could bring that to them? To do that, you have to do the honest thing. You have to register as a lobbyist, because you're not allowed to speak to a federal official without saying that you're going to see them. So I registered. You don't see piles of money coming out of my pocket. I was trying to do something that worked well in the city and bring a contact to the federal government, because they also had district meetings. It didn't go anywhere. We couldn't get the people together to do it. But I tried to help us as citizens of Canada get the same efficiencies and benefits there. But that's the thing. One story comes to me and says, what's this about? And I say, it's not true. And they say, well, we heard it from someone. I said, it's not true. We're going to run it anyway. And the rest of them run it quoting the first media. They didn't call me. They didn't interview me. Nobody spoke to me. And they have no documentation of any kind to substantiate. I said, show me what you have that proves anything you have. And nothing was presented to me. So what is someone in my position supposed to do when you're a public official? You ride it out. You have to have a tough skin in this business to be able to be there and do what you do for your residents. And the fact that someone keeps throwing it up doesn't talk about what they'll do for your community and your community. They don't talk about what they're able to do. They're trying to disparage someone else. When I put over 20 years into being a proud representative with a great track record that values my integrity and my honesty, and has been there for you all these years. And I take offense to it. But I'm not going to elevate it or try and press charges or anything else. It's not worth the effort.
Thank you, David.
I'm gonna
We can move on to the next question.
My name is Paul Kang. I live in this Hillcrest neighborhood, and I'm part of the association. Mr. Shiner, I appreciate your how forthright you are.
I told the media at the time that the market rent on my apartment is not a luxury unit. It's the 1960s apartment that I moved into when I left my house to my ex-wife here and my family. That happened. And I said that at the time, and I continue to say I pay market rent.
How much
As far as Christmas goes and the terrible storm that we got, the ice storm that we had. I was here in the city. I was around the ward. I was taking calls from seniors that couldn't get down from their building and having people take water upstairs to them where I could. I was out contacting Toronto Hydro. My own family, my 93-year-old father, we had to move him out of his house because his heating went out. I couldn't get him fixed any better than anyone else. All the information that I had was what Toronto Hydro was putting out. I stayed in touch with the senior executives. I followed what was going on. I had friends that told me that they had to carry their parents out of the house. We had to go through a systematic approach to starting back up the houses that had the areas that were affected and could be fixed most, and work their way down through the system. Now, there were problems with it. And we had a report at council that dealt with those problems. And we're trying to put fixes in, so if it happens again, and I hope it never does, it will be better. But I was here like the rest of you suffering through the ice storm. But people say they couldn't find me. What am I supposed to do? Answer my office and say, I'm sorry, I don't know when you found me back on. All I had was a computer screen. No one else had anything better. We're all out there. I was in the city. I was suffering like everybody else was. And I was dealing with the problems as I could and keeping in touch to be sure that whatever could be done was done.
Why were you not in Ward 24, though?
I was in Ward 24.
On Christmas Eve and Christmas Day?
I was in the city. I might have been there. What would you like me to be expressed? Did you want me to come to your doorstep? There was nothing that I could do personally to restore power to a house. If I could have, I would have sent it to my dad's house. But I didn't think it was fair to send it to one person over another. There was a process in place that Hydro took care of. And they did a pretty good job. We had a review of it. So my not being on Twitter is different.
Can you disclose what is your market rent, or what was your market rent when that article was written?
I don't remember what it is. And my personal expenses, I pay market rent on the apartment. I've been there for a long time.
But you don't know that figure? You can't share that?
I'm not disclosing my personal
I think
expenses. You know, you're trying to
David
be
has
something
already
like
answered the question.
Are you going to start telling me how much?
answer.
Are you going to start telling me all I can is how much they spent on dinners and wine and treatment, and how much is spent on their own expenses? You know my salary.
It's different because the article was insinuating that you're receiving below market rent from a developer who does business with City of Toronto. So as a voter, I want to know that my councillor's on the up and up.
And you asked me,
Just
and I
keep
answered.
me. I think the question is very
Thank you.
well answered, and I think we should move on. Anybody else has a question? Sorry, go ahead.
I'd like to make a comment, and that is to any politician that proposes, thank you, any politician that's proposing to effectively reduce the revenues of the City of Toronto. Yes, I did not pay the $60 on my car tax when I renewed my license, but my real estate tax went up. You had to replace that $60 somewhere, and it was reflected in our property taxes. So the idea of getting rid of the land transfer tax, terrible. It certainly hasn't hindered development, hasn't hindered sales. To get rid of that development tax, bad, yes. Nobody has said, how are you going to replace it? There was a comment that it would result in either a 15% increase in our property taxes, or we'd have to have a reduction in our services. I really have not heard from any politician how you can reduce revenue, balance your budget, and not increase it somewhere else. It really is an insult to hear that kind of a comment.
Dan, you want to respond?
Well, I can respond. That was exactly the point that I was trying to make. We talked about eliminating taxes and cutting cutting fees without describing what services then we're going to cut because we don't have that revenue, or admitting that that would result in a property tax increase. If we were honest with people, if you were honest with people about cutting the vehicle registration tax, you would at the same time tell them how much their property taxes went up because of it. Or the $60 annual vehicle registration tax, for those of you that take the TTC, your TTC fares have gone up by at least that much, your Metro Pass has gone up by at least that much, and if you're taking transit, is that not better for the city? So why would we cut the vehicle registration tax and reduce the revenue by that much while we're punishing, while we're penalizing people who take transit by increasing their fares by at least that much?
Brendan?
I think it's a snowball argument because government can always introduce taxes and then keep these taxes and introduce more taxes. We look at the HST, where provincial government introduced it, it's never going to go away. Income tax was introduced after the First World War. It was supposed to be for a year. It is now forever. So we just forget that these taxes were supposed to be temporary, or they're supposed to offset something, and then they just snowball. And the second part to the answer is we have to remember that we can find efficiencies. And we can decrease taxes or eliminate taxes that are unfair and still deliver the same kind of services by delivering it better. We have problems with City of Toronto employees who are not doing their job. We have problems with the bureaucracy, which is a very, very clumsy machine. And we need to fix that, and that's where a lot of the money is going to come from.
First of all, I want to first take issue with what Randy's saying about city employees. I've listened to him say it for 2 debates now, and I've listened to him twice tonight say that city employees are lazy, right? This is a ridiculous misconception that's taken place. It's been around since the beginning of time. I worked for the city of North York during summer student contracts, and there were a couple of guys out there who milked it. I got to be honest with you. But in any union organization, you do get those couple who are like that, right? In any organization, there will be people who are like that. And in the long run, the vast majority of people there, and I work with them every day now, filing applications while their staffing levels are reducing, and they actually have, and I brought this up at the last debate too, a 120-day wait time for a certain type of site plan application in the city of Toronto before they can even really respond to the first thing. These people are working very hard. There are positions that aren't being filled, and to say that they are lazy, and there's a laziness issue there, is a complete and utter misconception, and it's insulting. Now, secondly, in terms of efficiencies, we have to make sure, efficiencies can be found in any organization, but you have to make sure those efficiencies can be good, but you have to make sure that those efficiencies don't compromise the core values of the organization. This is something that was discussed even very recently on CBC, on Ontario Today, with someone from the Schulich School of Business, and he was actually presenting this. I don't remember his name, unfortunately, right now. But basically, we see efficiencies. We see the word efficiencies getting thrown around. And we talk about how the Shepherd subway is underutilized, right? And I think the problem really is how we're getting people to the Shepherd subway. And how do we encourage people to get on to the bus, right? And we saw a couple of years back where they actually decided in order to find 10% efficiency across the board, we were going to roll back the loading standards to, I think it was 2004 levels. And we saw a reduction in the TTC's subsidy from the city. And as a result now, at Don Mills, say you're on the Don Mills bus coming from that Shepherd subway, you wind up getting short-termed at random. And what I mean by that is if I'm going to Steeles, Don Mills and Steeles, where I live, or if you're a member of the a resident of the assisted living facility that's right across the street from me, they decide at random, it's not labeled on the front of the bus, they get a phone call somewhere around Finch, just before, and they say, oh, we're going to short-term you. And we all get dumped off the bus at the corner of Finch and Don Mills in the middle of winter when it's 40 below and there's a half dozen or a dozen of us there. And on occasion, if you get a really nice driver, he'll sit there and he'll wait with you. But that's only when you get the nice ones, right? And you're sitting out in the cold. And anyone in business understands that it's 10 times more difficult to get back a client once you've lost them than it is to earn them in the first place. And so when we're looking at efficiencies, we have to make sure that we're not compromising our core values and our core mission as an organization. And right now, one of those core values is getting people on transit.
So the question was, how can you end a tax and not have major tax increases? And the comment was, well, my taxes have gone up. But in fact, taxes over the last 4 years have gone up based on inflation. That's been the tax increases, and that I believe is appropriate. Any change besides that would be because of a change in assessment, where the properties that have a greater increase in assessment would go up more than the properties that have a lower increase in assessment percentage, and that's the provincial program through their assessment of impact. As far as what we've accomplished yet, we've found the savings. We've had a surplus of over $200 million most of the years. We've had that surplus in the city. So we've been able to accomplish the savings that we wanted to find. Look at things like we've done to be more efficient. It's not that employees are always lazy, because they work hard, but they're not always used well. They're not always put to the best use they could be, or they're scheduled for less work. So we contracted out half of the city for our waste collection, and guess what? The other half got so much more efficient because the union was challenged to work with the city to have its employees work smarter. So we've got savings, and not just on the contracted side, but on the non-contracted side. And let me tell you, I visited our facilities, I visit with our employees, there are ways that we can do things better. I came from a business background. I worked in business. That's where I was before I ran for office, and I was very successful at that. And we all know that everything that we do, we can try and do a little bit better. And a little bit better, 1 or 2 or 3% of a $9 billion budget is an awful lot of money that you can save. And currently, we have about 2,500 vacant positions in the city. I brought it up every time we have a quarterly report to say, either hire the people or reduce taxes. And there is a balance between that. Some of those people in some of the areas, we need them to provide better service. But some of those people haven't been in place now for years, and the jobs are getting done. So we have to look within the city as to how you streamline the operations within that division to get you better service. That's what we have to do, and we have done it, and we're going to continue to do it. And you can eliminate the land transfer tax, and you can do it by finding efficiencies, because remember how big our budget is to begin with, but you can't do it in one fell swoop. You can't get rid of it now because we're used to it. But we stopped the increases that went from $6 billion to $9 billion in 4 years. We stopped it dead in its track, and now we're working our way through those efficiencies. And the city manager himself and his reports and other organizations that have come in to see what the city's doing has given us tremendous marks for the efforts and the accomplishments that we've had in the last 4 years. I'm there, I've done it, and I'm asking you to support me to continue to do that and find the efficiency we need continue to maintain your services, but find ways to do them at a better and a lower cost.
Thank you, David. Any other question? Yes.
Hi, my name is Margaret Soon. I'm from the Bayview-Cummer riding, a little bit over to the west. But I had a question about the Capital Works program that Michael had mentioned he wanted to find more efficiencies for. For those who aren't aware, Capital Works projects includes anything from roads to water mains and sewer works in our project. And as much as our councillors like to promote the fact that we're building community centers and ice rinks, these are called glamorous projects, I guess you could say. Everyone likes to hear about it. But at the same time, it's a reality that we need to repave our roads, that we need to replace our water mains, replace our sewers. And North York and Willowdale right now, we're not as bad as the downtown core, but if we don't fix it now, we'll eventually get to a point where we get water main breaks 20 times over 10 years. And so how do you mitigate these construction impacts on our residents? And I know the City of Toronto is working to do things all at once so that you do the water main, the sewer, the road gets blocked for 8 months instead of just 4, but at the same time, you're disturbed once in 5 years and they won't come back again. And Michael, did you...
We've got a question. We've got a question. It's just a question, not a speech.
Sorry. The question is, how do you make construction more acceptable to residents here? How do you make the public image better?
Public image. Well, I think I agree with you, first of all, that maintenance has been lacking. And to some extent, it's taken a back seat to capital projects lately because we have a lot. You know, we've just been getting further and further behind to let people know transit would be considered a capital project, anything that's infrastructure really. And we've done a pretty poor job in the past of managing the finances of these projects. For an example being Union Station. I know it was, again, back from the David Miller days. Now at the same time, though, like I say, he's one vote. But it's about $300 million over budget, I believe it is, at this point, as of October anyways, of last year. And that's about 3.5% of 2013's entire operating budget. So, and there's many more, whether that be the Sony Center, whether that be Lawrence Market East, there's a lot that are way over budget. It's become a big thing these days. And I think first and foremost, we have to financially, we have to get control of these things and realize that when the city is out of their depth, we need to go and seek help, right? We took on management of Union Station ourselves, project management. We have a lot of very qualified people in there, but that's a very specialized project. And it's not something that we had the staff to get to engage. And so we should have looked to be out to the private sector for advice so that they could give us accurate budgeting numbers. Now there's always going to be surprises, but maybe they can go out and do some invasive testing, things like that. Look at foundations, look at old historical buildings a little better and get an idea. And then you hear stories about tearing down walls after they've been built because somebody didn't install a pipe behind it. Things like that. We need to realize when we're out of our depth and seek help at that point. And then, and finally, just to get control of the budget so that people have faith that we can deliver on time and within budget. Secondly, we need to make sure that we don't approve budgets that we already know are flawed. I believe it was Lawrence Market East where council actually approved the budget. I think it was $50 million at the time, so not one of the bigger projects. Maybe it wasn't 50. Anyways, the numbers escape me. But staff had actually already advised them that it was impossible to build this building for the budget that they had approved, right? And staff still went ahead, or the budget that they were voting on, and the council still went ahead and approved that budget. So that sends a message to architects and people in the industry saying, you know, there may be constraints on our projects. We may give you a request for proposal that says something, but, you know, realistically do what you want, right? It's a bad message, and I know that's not their intent. But that really is the message that's sent there. It's where it allows professionals to maybe think, I'd really like to take a picture of that building and put it in my book. So maybe if we go a little over budget, it'd be okay, right? And so those are the first parts. The second bit is that, again, managing them is incredibly difficult when they're actually building. I think that's mainly the meat of your question there, is how do we make it less impactful on neighborhoods? And that's really tough. I mean, it doesn't matter what we're doing. There was talk of businesses going under because of road construction, even just recently on the news. Because what we need to do, I think, is first of all plan detours around construction, so that if there's going to be long-term schedules, we need to make sure that there's a way around it. We need to make sure that those detours are properly signed, right? There's nothing more frustrating than driving up to a "this lane ends" and 50 meters sign when there's nothing you can do about it, right? And beyond that, just communicate with the public so that we know what's coming. I'm sorry, there's more than I'd like to say, and I seem to be out of time.
In terms of capital projects, I think it's important for us to concentrate on our roads, our sewers, on important infrastructural pieces. Again, going back to my philosophy, the people in the City of Toronto, I personally believe, are not working hard enough. We have roads that...
Capital projects aren't built by city employees. Thanks, Rick.
Thank you.
Well, regardless, they're not working hard enough. So I'm still going to mention the fact that we have roads that are blocked, and we have, pylons. No one's working there. We pass these roads, and then we wait the next day, and the next day after that, and they're not being fixed.
So let's talk about what's happening. First of all, we have a process we put in place when it comes to road repairs now. So we want to get all the work done that could be done before we resurface the road, and then we don't allow it to be opened up for 5 years after that. That's the new policy. So we're trying to catch up on the backlog that hasn't been done, because you know how bad our roads were getting and our sewers were getting and our water. So the water services are being replaced through the water budget. So it's part of the fees that you pay for water, it's not part of your taxes. The roads are being repaired with a capital budget that we increased to deal with the road repairs and fix those. We have to get the other work done in place, whether it's the gas companies or the hydro companies, they're all doing their work before we fix the road. Then when you talk about budgeting, you don't budget a community center in the same budget that you have for your road repairs. Road repairs are out of we do it out of the capital budget. It's debt financed, a portion of it every year is fairly large, but we manage that. But the community center, in fact, is not paid for by taxpayers' dollars. It's paid for by Section 37 payments from developers, by development charges which we're collecting on that site. $38 million community center, no tax dollars going into it. It's amazing. That's why it was approved in 2002 as a concept and funded in 2014, because I had to bring it to that point. So it didn't cost you tax dollars to get it. The park that's being built in the middle of Concord, it's a $4.5 million upgrade to the park. The developer is paying for it and required to pay for it as part of his approvals. So we changed the two. The issues with the funding at Union Station and the issue with St. Louis Market, absolutely, they were wrong. They were approved under Miller. That's no excuse. I didn't vote for them, but I fixed it. Because I dealt with that issue as chair of the Government Management Committee. And staff reported, well, we approved those projects with 65% engineering on them because we had to get going because of the federal infrastructure program. So I brought a policy that says you can't do that anymore. You have to tell us the full cost, the real cost, because there will be nothing else. And my comments to staff were, rationalization is not justification. You can't keep wasting tax dollars of residents that way and expect us to pay more. So we're fixing those issues that are out there and trying to make sure that they don't happen again.
Thank you, David. Dan?
I'll try to keep it brief. We have been having these issues. We've been having these issues for many years, including the entire term that the councilor's been at City Council. We do need to invest in capital projects, and not just with debt financing, but since we're going to need to pay for those things anyway, we need to talk about what they really cost and not just pay for our water and sewer maintenance from with debt. I think we need to look at what those things really cost and pay the real cost of those capital projects.
The water and sewer is out of debt. You know, it's budgets, but not debt finance.
Mr. Shiner, I have a question. I drive on the roads every day, and I hit the same cuts and bumps every day for years. To me, many of them, I'd say most of them, are not prepared properly. there was an article, several articles in the Star, The Fixer, maybe you've read The Fixer, where they interviewed the person at City Hall who was in charge of these repairs. Inspectors are not doing their job. And they have obviously not been doing the job for years. Because these repairs have been needed for years and years. If you drive over them on Yonge Street, on Comer, just any corner, any road, pick any road, what are you going to do about it?
Now, I want to understand, you're talking about when someone cuts into the road and fixes it?
That's right.
That's an issue that we've dealt with the utilities, because the utilities were in the past permitted to do the repair work. The city has now said, no, we're not going to let you do it because they've been substandard. You're now going to pay us, and we're going to manage it. So go look over at Yonge and Finch, and the road was repaved from Yonge Street going north. I think it was 2 years ago. They literally did it over a weekend and resurfaced the roadway there, and it's in great shape. And the city knows how to do those roads right. When you first cut the road, and then you do a temporary patch, is what they do on top, then they mark those now for full repairs later. It goes now into our capital budget, but before, the city's going to fix that portion where Enbridge might have been in, or water might have been in. We're going to make sure nobody else has to go into that area for the next 5 years, because we're going to lock it up. And that means they wait a while. But they haven't all been fixed great, and if people tell me where they are, we get them fixed. But the ones that we're doing, and the city does, are pretty good, and we're going to take it over from utilities now.
Thank you, David. Any other questions? Yes.
I am a resident of Willowdale and have been for 40 years. And I have to tell you that when you get into an election campaign, it becomes personal. That, to my mind, is counterproductive. We have too many issues in Willowdale that have to be dealt with. And those are the issues that should be addressed. My questions are as follows. Number one, we are going to get hammered with some kind of extraordinary cost with the Pan Am gates. And don't tell me that the provincial government's going to pick up the shortfall. They are not. Okay? The city of Toronto, first of all, every city councilor, all 44 of them, will be standing in line to take credit for the great Pan Am gates. That's just the way things happen in this city. The city of Toronto is going to have to pay an enormous amount of money that is probably unfunded. And where's that money going to come from? Number two, talk about seniors. People who are on fixed income in the city, in the Willowdale 24, cannot afford the taxation increases that continually are rising. Here's two suggestions, since you seem to have all this extra money. Number one, freeze our taxes. If you're over 65, even if it means a means test, then freeze our taxes. That's it. Don't defer our taxes. Freeze our taxes at 2014 rates. If we were able to pay our 2014 taxes, we likely will be able to pay our tax base going forward. But freeze them. Number two, we need to get rid of, in Willowdale, where it is rampant, we need to get rid of multiple residences in single-family dwellings. It's happening everywhere. People are building houses in their garages and renting them out to students. They're fire hazards. We do nothing about it. They're brought to the city's attention. The city doesn't even bother sending an inspector out. Addresses, information has been given out to people, not used. Finally, we have an abhorrent, and David Shiner's office knows how I feel about this, an abhorrent issue with illegal parking from the chiropractic college. It's everywhere in here. They park for 8-9 hours a day. Now, Angela Severite from the police force has been made aware and has said, we will ticket these people. I don't see that happening because I drive through that horrid traffic every day on Threadneedle. Number two, I'm told, David, that the responsibility for getting no parking signs, 10 to 4, 9 to 3, whatever it is, that would deter them from parking here. It's not only on this side, it's on James Gray and all the sides over there. Nothing has been done. I have been on with your office for more than a year, and I have all of the correspondence to prove it. For a year, asking for no parking signs on Osmond Court, Threadneedle, and Myers Lane between 9 and 3. And I've been given every bit of garbage excuse as to why it can't be done. It's done on McNichol. It's done on my street. I live on Michael. My street has no parking because of the A.Y. Jackson issue. Well, that was a problem. We put no parking Monday to Friday, 9 to 4. Believe me, the residences of our area that are most impacted by the chiropractic college are seniors. And if you try to drive north from Dexter along Threadneedle, around the curve, it's a hazard. It's one lane now because they park for 8 hours on both sides of the street. And some of the people in David's office know exactly what I'm talking about. These are the issues that are relevant to us. I don't want to hear any more about transit. Quite frankly, I don't give a flying fidoo about transit. At my age, it's not going to be an impact. I want to know about things that impact me. I want to know about good roads. I want to know about no parking. I want to know about freezing my property taxes. Those are the things that are important to me. I want someone to represent me as a councillor who cares about Willowdale. I don't give a flying damn what you want some train running along the lakeshore. That has no bearing on me.
Thank you.
This is 24. Let's worry about 24.
Thank you. David?
There's a number of issues here. As far as Pan Am goes, it's backstopped by the provincial government. It's their games. The city's finished. That's our budget. And I don't stand in line saying it's great. Pan Am Games was a nice thing to bring to the city and support our athletes. I worked with the Olympic group and we're trying to bring the Olympics to the city at that time and met a number of them, and they were absolutely wonderful. You can be so proud of these young people that represent our country, and I never was more proud of them. You can't pick an age to freeze taxes. You can't say if you're 65 you freeze taxes just because you're older. So what do you do when someone's got a $3, $4, $5 million house? You freeze their taxes. If you freeze it on one, the rest of you people are going to pay. Somebody has to pay. So we've kept taxes in line with inflation.
I said subject to a means test.
We have assistance for lowered, but you can give it to a means, and then somebody else, who's a young family, who may be making more, has to pay. You can't say one group can't pay, even with a means test. You own a house, and I have seniors that own houses, and it may be difficult, but they're $1 million homes. They're paid for it. So I should have a young family that's sitting here pay the taxes for that senior? That's not fair. If you
Paying
can't,
their education.
are we debating now?
He's paying their education taxes.
So are they.
So are they. We all pay the same education tax. It's provincial rules, and a lot of the money that's paid in education taxes in Toronto goes out of the city because the provincial government collects it. We don't. So I believe in keeping the taxes to a cost of living increase, finding efficiencies so we can get rid of the usurious fees that are out there. That's what I believe in. You may not. I do. Most of my residents support that. The rooming house issue. We are trying very hard with rooming houses. We work under provincial legislation. We actually do follow up. There's a home over on Mintwood. We investigated and worked directly with the head of our municipal licensing. We're trying to bring in new regulations if we can for this provincial regulations. Not only did we find it, we found enough to actually test charges. We laid the charges, and the provincial prosecutor said, no, I'm not going to go forward. So now the community is issuing a petition to go after our provincial member to make the Ministry of the Attorney General go after and press the charges. What's the sense of us investigating when they won't even take them to court and let a judge make a decision? The prosecutor's dropping it. Do you know how we all feel horrible? And then the house caught on fire. The house caught on fire, the one that they dropped the charges on. It's horrible. But I can't change the provincial regulations, but I can make sure that we continue to investigate everywhere we can, but you're not allowed to regulate the number of unrelated people in a house, and you're not allowed to enter a house without someone's permission, and you can't get a charge against anybody without a witness that'll go to court and give evidence, because you have no evidence to give. So we are working on it. Now, parking on our side streets. I don't live there, and I do what the community wants and the neighbors want. And when they want regulations, we put them in place. When they don't, we don't. When the street asks me and says, I don't like it, I send it off to transportation, they do a review, they come back with recommendations, and I circulate it to the street. And I ask the people on the street, you live there, what do you want? And guess what? They never agree. Because some have people that visit, some have gardeners or handymen that come, some want the on-street parking, some rent out units in their basement. And they have single-car garages. So I leave it to the majority of residents on a street. It is not my decision, it is not your decision. Who will park on Threadneedle and who will park on Osmond Court? It's the people that live on that street.
No, that's not true.
That's the ones. But I work with what the majority of the people want.
Total 12 houses there.
I surveyed the street.
Yeah, I know my neighbors.
I get a
That's students who park on our
I
street.
survey
And for sure, seniors are impacted. I work during the day.
everywhere they are.
The seniors are in the houses.
We ask them all, and I get responses. Students don't respond. So I have the responses with the names and the address. I can only do what people on the street want. And you know, I send out a letter and ask for a response. Well, I don't get many, I send out a second letter. And I say, I asked you, could I please have a response? And then I work after the second letter with whatever happened. I send everybody on the street a letter that says, these recommendations are going to community council. If you agree or disagree with them, come to community council and speak.
I may want to add, David, we approached Chiropractor College and complained to them for the student parking everywhere. So they have taken steps to refrain the students from parking where they are doing so, especially in this Picklebird Plaza. We had complaints from the customers who are coming to shop that they had no place to park. So the management, I approached them, they had a person come in and tag these vehicles, and some of them were from the Chiropractic College. So we complained to the Chiropractic College, and they have now advised the student not to park in here. So that's one of the steps that we took. Dan, you want to add?
Yeah, I'd like to address the question because it has to do with the service that you receive from a counselor's office. And adjusting parking regulations is a basic service that if a community wants the parking regulations adjusted, then you need to be willing to adjust according to what the community wants. And clearly there are people who are here who feel strongly about those parking regulations, and that should be a basic service. We need to address the needs of the community, and especially the people who feel strongly about that. Obviously there will be people on the street who are not as concerned or okay with whatever the parking regulations are, but the people who feel strongly about those, who are in the room tonight, those are where we need to, and that's a basic level of service that a counselor's office should be providing.
To wrap up the proceeding, now we have each of the candidates will deliver 2 minutes of the closing remarks. Start with David.
Thank you, and thank you very much for coming up and looking at this stage. I understand what you, the taxpayer, wants, and I'll always listen to what you have to say. I'm never afraid to challenge the process to think outside the box and to be the voice of the people. I never forget the needs of our seniors and our youth. I've built 2 new youth shelters, saved Carefree Lodge from closing, and have brought improvements to our other seniors' homes. In this next term, my plan includes building a new seniors' home, working with North York General Hospital to expand their services, keeping taxes down, ending the land transfer tax while maintaining city services, continuing to enhance our parks and public spaces, and expand the subway system and find ways to get traffic moving. As a former budget chief, chair of the Government Management Committee, vice chair of the Executive Committee, I have the experience needed to work with whoever is elected mayor to tackle the challenges Toronto will face in the next term of council. I believe we can build a consensus in City Council to deliver the results that you, the residents, want. It's been my honor and privilege to serve you. I'm asking for you to vote for me, David Shiner, on October 27th so I can continue to champion your values on issues that matter most to you. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Michael?
I did not come here tonight to quote slogans that have been repeated so many times they've lost all meaning, nor have I attempted to buy your vote with unrealistic tax screams. Instead, I've shared a vision with you that will transform Willowdale into a complete community. One where we maintain a strong connection to the rest of the city, but reduce our dependency on it. Because the gentleman over here is right. it is about Ward 24. And we need to focus on our ward. We need to focus on issues like Line 9 that we haven't discussed once tonight, that is still a very current issue. And new developments with the National Energy Board have changed the situation greatly. And there's paper at the back if you'd like to read how. We need to address development issues, maintenance, and the quality of our public spaces. I have a plan, I have the skills and the background to execute that plan. I have a strong connection to our community, and my background in architectural design and community planning, paired with my deep roots in the community, make me the ideal candidate for the role of Willowdale's next councillor. So I ask that on October 27th, you vote to realize Willowdale. You vote for Michael Galea.
Thank you. Randy?
I think on October 27th, you'll be given real power for a chance for a change. And as I've stated before, don't vote with the status quo. It's important for you to introduce new people into City Council who have fresh new ideas, who are willing to push the envelope just a bit to represent you and to be passionate about representing you. A councillor who has been in place for more than 2 decades loses a little bit of luster, loses a little bit of the enthusiasm to go and fight for your rights. May not pick up the phone calls, may not be as willing to be your champion. And I think that's the problem here. With all due respect, and I strongly believe that Mr. Shiner has done a good job, but it's time for new blood to come in, for someone to not just be there to collect a paycheck, but to want to assist you as your neighborhood champion to represent you at City Hall. I want to be that person. I'm Randy I on October 27th. Please vote for me.
Dan?
It is time for change. Our community needs leadership, someone who shares our values, and someone who will fight for us. I'm a public servant and a community volunteer with deep roots in Willowdale and the right plan to bring positive change to our community. I've lived in Willowdale for over a decade. My degree's in geography and urban planning from the University of Western Ontario, and I'm passionate about our community and about delivering positive change. I've worked in both the private and the public sector, and I worked in the private sector very recently, and I have extensive experience in frontline leadership and policy development. In the private sector, I worked in the technology industry, first in sales and customer service, and then developing technology solutions to improve efficiencies. In the public sector, I've worked in the provincial government, helping to connect people to the services they need. And for the past 5 years, I've worked in the federal public service, helping people on the front lines before moving up into roles, implementing technology solutions to improve service delivery. I'd like to do the same for our city. There are ways we can use technology to improve efficiency, improve the service we receive from our city, and serving our community is our highest calling. We deserve a councillor who keeps to the highest ethical standards. As your councillor, I will be accessible, hardworking, responsive, and I have a 7-point plan through which we can all win. First, I'll bring integrity back to Willowdale. Second, I'll fight for our values, community, diversity, transparency. Third, I'll build transit and break this traffic gridlock. Fourth, I'll work with City Council to develop better neighborhoods through smarter planning and smarter growth. Fifth, I'll protect and expand our parks. Sixth, I'll strengthen our city's services. And I'm going to deliver real leadership at City Council for a change. Our families have been calling out for more transit, less gridlock, better development through smarter planning and smarter growth, the protection and expansion of our parks, strengthen city services, and a representative who shares our values. As our next City Councillor, that's what I'll deliver for a change. It's time for a new direction, leadership that puts our community first and solves our challenges. That means it's time to stop talking about transit and start building it. It's time to stop rubber stamping bad development and start smarter planning that results in smarter growth. It's time to stop the senseless cuts and start wiser investing to strengthen our city's services. It all results in a community we'll be prouder of for a change. That's what I'll deliver. So with trust, hope, and hard work on October 27th, I ask for your support to elect me as our next City Councillor. That's how we'll all win. That's how we'll bring integrity back to Willowdale under the new leadership of a new city councilor for a change.
Thank you, Dan. I wish to thank you for coming and attending this meeting, and wish to thank all the candidates, and we wish them well. This concludes our meeting.
You know what?
We never met. I'm George.